Welcome to the Dice Tower, a series of video reviews about board and card games. Here are your hosts.
Hey everybody, I'm Tom Vassell.
I'm Chris Yee.
I'm Mike Delisio.
And I'm Roy Cannaday.
Today we got something a little bit different in regards to a game because I feel like we're reviewing a game, except it's actually an expansion, and that's Dice Throne Adventures, which is an expansion for both Dice Throne Series 1 and Series 2. They're the same thing, just different people. But it also is a completely different game. But you also can't buy it and play it without owning one of those other two. Confused yet? So before we're going to show you Dice Throne Adventures in just a second. But before we do that, I wanted to quick give us a rundown from all of us as to what we think of Dice Throne, the normal game. Roy, what would you think?
I really enjoyed Dice Throne. I played it with you several times, and I've played it in different situations. I played it when the first edition came out. I had a friend in my game group who I played it with as well. I really enjoyed the game, and I think it's a great head-to-head Yahtzee style rolling off battling. I mean, I know you've said it before, but like it feels like King of Tokyo that you would play with two players. But it's a lot of fun knocking each other out in their hit points and things like that with tons of different special powers and building up those combos.
What about you, Mike?
Yeah, this is my preferred dice combat game for two players. This is kind of my favorite of the Yahtzee style dice battlers. I like it a lot.
And Chris?
I've always enjoyed this one a lot, more than I thought that I would, because I'm not always into the confrontational head-to-head kind of playing game, but something about that deck of cards you draw from, the dice, the Yahtzee rolling, it's very simple, but very combo-y and very just pleasant.
I also really enjoy it, and in fact, as this video goes up, I took a look at Dice Throne Rerolled, where they redid Series 1. Tell you my thoughts on the game and how they've changed. I used to like it. Now I like it much more than I used to. But this is different. This takes that game and plugs it into a dungeon crawl of sorts. Chris is going to show you how.
Here's the setup of Dice Throne Adventures. If you're familiar with the game, you'll notice this part is just Dice Throne, which is required to have either Season 1 or Season 2 characters to play. But this is the new stuff over here. This giant card caddy comes with the monsters and the dungeon tiles that you'll set up according to the setup chart. There are different variations for the different scenarios. There's 8 of them in total. I'm going to show you a portal crawl scenario, and then I will also show you, with new setup, what the boss battles look like. You'll alternate between portal crawl and then boss battle. So you follow the setup here, including health and all those other things, and then you simply begin playing. To do so, you first move and then encounter and explore the dungeon tiles. So if I'm the monk, I can choose to move orthogonally, and I'll go over here to this tile here, flip it over. Level 1 tiles are easier than level 2s, easier than 3s, easier than the final boss portal over there. And when I flip over a tile, you gain whatever benefits are here on the side. You get whatever effects happen here. Some of these are straight up bad, whereas some of these have opportunities for rolling dice and pushing your luck to try and see what, maybe you get something good, maybe you get something worse. And then finally, you summon a minion, in this case a level 1 minion for me, the monk, to be engaged in combat with. I pull it out here. It has 8 health, and it's going to be trying to roll its own special chaos dice to affect us. You do the normal Dice Throne combat where you'll roll the dice up to 3 times and you try and get whatever symbols you want and inflict damage, and then at the end of that you defend for the minion, who will get their own special defense, and then they're going to roll all 5 of the chaos dice and try and get certain combinations of things. In this case, they want to roll as many white symbols as possible. If I pulled out the Chaos Elf, they're trying to roll straights. When you defeat a minion, you get a special reward, and so the rewards are determined by the loot dice, a special D20 that you roll and compare against this chart. So if I defeated it in combat, I rolled a 2, which means I consult, hey, that was a level 1 minion, so I get a level 1 treasure. And this is a token which will allow me to inflict 1 extra damage in the future. Dice Throne is just full of these special ability tokens. Whereas you can see there's health, there's gold, which are tracked for future purchases as you go along the campaign, and even specialty cards that you get to add to your player deck, making yourself stronger over the course of the campaign. Eventually, players will take turns, they can assist each other in combat, or eventually explore and get all of these shards. These dice shards once you succeed in these areas, will be thrown over onto the final portal. Once all of them are collected, players can take their turns and eventually move over here to this portal, engaging in the final combat. Each scenario, each portal crawl has its own level 4 boss minion that you will be fighting against. And in this case, we drew the Emperor Cobra. The Emperor Cobra will have 30 health that you'll be fighting against, and it is seeking for its own special variation of rolling dice and poisoning you and defending you and everything. There's also a new mechanism introduced called the King's Hand to make these special minions more difficult, where if you use an ultimate, a Yahtzee of 6s against it, it will spend these to try to force you to re-roll one of your dice, or if it does not succeed at hitting its target, it will also spend one of these to take another turn. So that's what a portal crawl looks like. I'm going to reset this up so you can see what the next scenario, a boss battle, would look like. Here's what the other scenarios, the boss battles, are going to look like. You'll notice that there is a fallen barbarian. There are 4 simulated bosses that you'll be fighting against. They're set up with a certain number of special upgraded cards, stronger versions of their basic abilities, and they have a few King's Hand tokens. Every time the players take a turn, they will roll their combat dice and the boss will defend, and then the boss will fight against them. At the end of the Pyromancer's turn, then it comes over to the monk. The monk will roll their dice 3 times, fight against the barbarian who will defend. Then the barbarian fights back against the monk. And so on the barbarian's turn, he will flip over his top card. He'll get an income of 1 card and 1 combat point. Then he'll see, can he afford these combat points? If he can, he will go ahead and take whatever the effect is, spending them, do whatever the effect of the card is, and then he'll have a roll objective as defined down here. In this case, getting as many whites as possible, so he's going to roll up to 3 times to try and get as many whites as he can. And then he looks and sees what is the biggest priority attack that he can do. If he meets multiple conditions, he will go ahead and do whatever has the highest priority number here in the corner and unleash that damage on the active player. If the boss reveals an orange card, they won't resolve this until it's relevant. So in this case, they'll roll for extra damage, but players also get small little benefits along the way in the top right corner of these boss decks. And the point of this is just a straight up brawl to see, can you eliminate their health, or will players lose their shared combined health? So that's the 2 game modes. This is just a simulated, more like a normal combat instead of the dungeon crawl. This is the 2nd, 4th, 6th, and 8th scenarios are the different bosses. Also, I should mention that included in the game are these legacy packs that you can unlock more content after you've played through the game.
All right, thanks, Chris. Let's talk about the components for this game. I think no one's going to complain about the beautiful everything. I mean, it's just gorgeous all around. And in fact, if you're really lucky, you can get the 3D painted miniatures, those extra, which I like those a lot. There's lots of unique art in this game. The whole thing comes together, but I do have some minor complaints. First of all, if you're going to play Dice Throne with Dice Throne Adventures, that's 2 huge boxes you're carrying around. I kind of wish that it had come with hey, I can stick a couple of the heroes in it, so when I go to my friend's house, I can just take this 1 box and not 2 boxes for a giant game, except the game doesn't feel that giant. So I wish it was a little bit more compact. That's one complaint I have about the production values. The other is, and this is just maybe a personal thing, but I really dislike when people call things legacy that aren't legacy. And it says there's legacy cards in this, but they're just more cards. That's not legacy. That's just more cards. But that's, I don't know. Chris, what'd you think?
I think component-wise, especially, this is on par with the Season 2 quality of Dice Throne. You know, the first one they released was good, and I didn't have complaints, but then when they made the new edition, so to speak, and this Dice Throne Season 1 re-rolled, I mean, they really upped the quality, and I feel like this one lives up to that. I don't have any issues with the tiles or the cards or any of that stuff. I do agree with what you said, Tom, that the game trays, as fantastic as they are, that make the insert really, really useful, are also giant, and so size is probably my only complaint. I don't know about you, Mike. How about you?
Yeah, I would say that this is one of those weird situations where I think one of the game's greatest strength is also a weakness, and you've mentioned it. It's that you have these amazing game trays that you basically pull them out, and that's all you need right there. At least for the actual character, you have to do some setup with the tiles, but it also takes up a tremendous amount of room. And Tom, I couldn't agree with you more that it would be great if you could put in a couple of characters in that box so that it would make the portability of it. Even with that, even just one box is still a bit of a challenge, but the component quality is great. The art is great. I was happy even with the standees. The first game I played with Chris, we had standees. That was fine, although the minis are great. Roy, what do you think?
I mean, I think Roxy does a great job with their components for this. And I mean, I really enjoy the way stuff looks with Dice Throne. I mean, this is mostly, we're talking about the adventure stuff. So, I mean, you have mostly cards and things like that, and a couple bosses and things like that you fight. So it's not really any of the characters and stuff like that. But I think they've done a good job making it fit in with all the rest of the Dice Throne stuff. And the quality is really nice.
So this is a game that kind of comes in parts. You go through a dungeon, and then you fight a boss. And they split that into two parts, but it's essentially... it's a little weird because you fight like mini boss, then you fight boss. The boss plays very differently. But what did you think, Chris, about the flow of the game? You're going through a dungeon crawl, and where would you compare this to maybe other dungeon crawl games you've played?
This is one of the hard things. Is it almost feels 0% like a dungeon crawl. Really, it mostly just feels like flip over the next tile and, some silly things happen and maybe a few of them give you a choice, but it could have just been like an event deck that you flip over and you get through a certain number of event decks, and then you can fight the mini boss. I do appreciate, even though it's a little bit odd that they structured it, the first session is a dungeon crawl and the second one is like a boss battle. I appreciate that they didn't squish those two together, because then that would be too long. So I think that helps the game, each session, kind of feel like it moves along. It doesn't outstay its welcome. I don't know about you, Mike. Do you have any thoughts on that?
Yeah, no, I do agree with you. I think it's good that they put it into those two kind of distinct phases. But I also would agree that the dungeon crawl is almost a red herring, because this game comes down to whether you're playing just regular Dice Throne or you're playing Dice Throne Adventures. It comes down to head-to-head battles. And, the tiles are just, who am I fighting, usually. I mean, there's a few different tiles in there, but for the most part, you're going to face a minion, and that's what you're going to use to get your loot. So is it dungeon crawl in feel? Not really. It still feels like Dice Throne, which to some extent, to me, is a plus, because that's what I came here for. Mm-hmm. And although it changes the game a little bit, it still feels like Dice Throne. That's my take on that.
Yeah, I don't think you get a whole lot of sense of exploration in this game at all. It's really just flip a tile. Oh, there's another bad guy, which you basically expect. You draw it out of the deck. Okay, what's he have this time? You can sometimes get different bad guys, so it's like, oh, well, each different bad guy has sort of different themes and different things they can do, and you're facing off against different stuff, and there's different special abilities. You have to try to figure out how to mitigate with that with the powers that you have of your current Dice Throne character, and there's a little bit of things you can do in this that you couldn't do in the other game with the working together with the other player, because normally all of your stuff is just directly about destroying the other player you're playing with. With this, you can do the cooperation and maybe do a little bit of healing each other, but a lot of characters, depending on the character you're playing with, aren't super set up very well for that sort of thing. Right. But yeah, it is definitely interesting. The dungeon crawl part of it doesn't feel super strong to me.
Yeah, it's interesting you mentioned that there's a few powers and things on these characters that suddenly in a dungeon setting you go, oh, this actually works better. I barely use this one in the actual in the game, and here it works a little bit better. That being said, for me on a personal level, I thought fewer is better in this particular game, because the way they do it is they simply distribute hit points the more people you have. The problem is if you have very few hit points, one or two blows can take you out. And one of the things I particularly struggled with this game, and it's just one, is I felt that it was difficult and really relied on luck. And the weird thing is that there's a lot of luck in Dice Throne anyway, but Dice Throne is a really fast back and forth game. I don't like playing through a whole thing of this and then I just roll poorly against one of these minions I run across and they just shellac me with, and all that. And the luck in this felt more powerful. It felt like you could get taken out sometimes with a blow, or you just keep rolling terribly on finding the loot chart to find stuff that's not that interesting, or you can't heal yourself to save your life. And I struggled with that. I don't know where y'all sit on that one.
Luck is heavy, and of course, like I said, it's in the original, but it does feel heavier and plays a bigger hand in this game. And this is one of those play through a series of 8 sessions where if you lose, you simply replay it, and maybe there's a few more interesting choices they could have made where if you lose, we'll continue the story, but you take a loss on that campaign chart, but you get compensated with a few extra power-up cards or something. And I think, in general with that, I think this as a campaign could have been a little bit more robust with more upgrades and, upgrades that you feel a little bit more. So, I don't know, between the luck and that, that's a potential negative, even though the core loop of the game, rolling dice and everything, it's pretty fun.
Yeah, I see what you're saying, and I agree to an extent, although getting back to this less is more idea, I don't know that they could have done that without adding more complexity, and I really like how simple the game is. I keep coming back to it still feels like Dice Throne to me, and that's important because, again, that's what I came here for. One thing I will mention, and you kind of hinted at it a little bit, Roy and Tom, I think in Dice Throne Adventures, it's maybe more important than in even regular Dice Throne, the characters you pick. Because as you mentioned, Tom, if you go out and you have nobody that can heal you and you're relying on that loot chart to heal, good luck, because you're probably not going to roll what you need to heal. And so you either need to have cards in your deck or another character that can heal you, or else you very well may die. And I felt like there were times that if we'd had this character, maybe I would have been able to get through this more easily. And if you're playing in a solo campaign, and I've done both, I played solo and multiplayer, there is something about running that same character game after game after game. I wish there was a way to switch up characters. I mean, I think I understand mechanically why you can't, because you upgrade cards as you go through the game. But it would be nice to be able to change that out, because after a while, you're like, man, I kind of feel like I'm doing the same powers over and over again. So that's one thing I noticed. Roy, what are your thoughts?
One of my favorite things about Dice Throne is the fact that you get to upgrade your character as the game alongs. You get all these CP points where you're building out these cards and like making all of your actions better. In a normal game of Dice Throne, you start with 50 hit points, which is way up there. In this game, I mean, I think like the max, even when you're playing solo, is like 37 or something like that. I'm not sure. It's like, regardless, it's below 50. And then the more players you have, it just gets lower and lower. So you actually have less time to build up those combos and build up everything in the game. So your character feels more underpowered than it would normally feel versus a normal head-to-head game, especially at the start of the game. And I'm sure as you get further in things, then you're going to unlock more cards and things like that. But it feels like, man, I really wish I could build up more as we're going along in this game. But I still think it's an interesting way to play this game in a cooperative mode. If you just really love Dice Throne, you play it in a cooperative mode or play it solo, and that's what this allows you for the opportunity. But it can be difficult with that minimized hit points because they want to keep that threat and pressure on you, but it forces you to just like go, and that's all the choices you have,
Right.
Well, Mike, I know that you like this game a lot. What are some of the things that you really enjoy about it?
Well, first of all, I do like that you can. I'm going to be a broken record here. I like that you can play this solo now. That's something that obviously is important to me, and this is a game that I enjoy playing multiplayer, and now I like having that option to play it solo. I do feel like it is kind of cool to take a core system that you're comfortable with and see it in a slightly different light. And that's what this kind of does for me, is that it feels like Dice Throne, but now we're doing something slightly different, and we can now cooperate to take on this common foe. And so while the sense of exploration, I agree, is not really high there, now to me, this is just a new way to play Dice Throne, and that's enough. That's kind of what I was hoping it would be. I didn't feel like I had to learn a whole new game. That was really refreshing. Looking at the rule book the first time and going, oh, it's Dice Throne. Good. I don't have to learn a whole new game. It's just a few things to keep track of that are a little bit different, putting out tiles. But at heart, I liked Dice Throne. I like cooperative games. I love solo games. This gives me everything in one package.
Yeah, this is the thing. I'm really happy with Dice Throne. I didn't need this extra stuff. I'm not opposed to trying it out, but now that I played it, I want to go back to Dice Throne. I have a lot of problems with this. We've talked about this in the studio quite a bit. And I feel like I've given the game a decently fair shake, and it could just be argued that it's not for me, right? Yeah. But I don't like things from getting a card in your deck that you may never see or use. I don't like what Roy mentioned earlier, where you have less time to build up, and then the stuff you build up isn't necessarily going to help you in the next level of the dungeon. It feels super lucky. Half the powers I'll never use because they're only good in a duel or if I have time to build up. And I feel like every enemy I come across, it's like just damage it as much as you possibly can, trying to kill it in one blow if possible. And the nuance of fighting isn't there. And that nuance of fighting, I feel, was better in the two-player one. So, and that's just a few of the problems I have. I also think it's too difficult. I think it's too much to carry around for such a light game. Saying I dislike it's pretty strong, but I feel like if I never play it again, I wouldn't be upset. But I think Chris liked it more.
Yeah, I can't necessarily disagree with a few of those points, Tom, but at the end of the day, I still had a lot of fun with it, which is what it puts me in an interesting place while trying to review it, in that I still have a lot of experience. I think back, and I think, oh, that was really cool, though, that time that I pulled off an ultimate at just the right moment and then, defeated this boss that we weren't sure we were going to defeat because, the person I was playing with also just pulled off an ultimate before me. It has those highs that Dice Throne has, but it makes this game a little bit more accessible. Having this expansion makes it accessible for some people who can't necessarily play Dice Throne head-to-head, because I agree that's the best way to play it. But if you have a gaming partner that doesn't like the head-to-head nature of it, why not fight a boss, which is basically an automated player?
Well, that's true.
That was my argument. I was going to mention that.
Go ahead, Roy. I like fighting a...
Yeah, that's what I was thinking. I was thinking the main reason that you would get this game, and this is like what I would recommend this for, is if you already have Dice Throne, maybe you play with your buddies head-to-head, but you have someone who doesn't enjoy head-to-head confrontation as much, this game is really good for that. And also, if you just really enjoy Dice Throne and you want to get it to the table when no one else is around, you can play this cooperatively, and a lot of the mechanics feel like Dice Throne, and then you're fighting off against these Atama bosses and things like that.
That's still a lot of money, though.
That is the thing.
That's a concern of mine. It's space, money, getting it out, pulling out all the pieces. So my final rating for the game, and I struggled over where I'd put this, I think a 5. And I again, this is with me giving an 8.5 to the actual game. It just doesn't hit it for me. I played it with my kids. I played it with Roy. I like the idea of the game more than I liked playing it. When I played it, I felt like I was just, I think it's a really cool mechanism actually for the bad guys. You roll dice and it says roll for this combination. Mm-hmm. But I felt that's what I was doing also. And that took out the nuance. Like, oh, should I do this thing that can build me up? No, hit the enemy. Mm-hmm. And I know someone in the review comments will say, well, you need to get better at strategy and stuff. But I would argue that that's more thought than this game deserves. But I am not the majority here, I think. Roy, what's your final thoughts and rating?
I think I'm going to give the game a 7, but that's also with the caveat on you really need to want this game for solo experience. Like if you really enjoy Dice Throne already, check this out for that. And it allows you to play the game cooperatively, you know. I think the game is not, it didn't overwhelm me with exploration of dungeon stuff. That's what the game, like the name of Dice Throne Adventures, makes you think. It is definitely not that kind of thing. It's mostly just like fight monster after monster after monster. You can upgrade your deck and things like that as you go along through the campaign, but you have to be in for that. And the price point is pretty heavy, but 7 for me. It's enjoyable, but not something that is super crazy exciting as far as the game goes.
All right, what about you, Chris?
I'm also going to land at a 7 with this one, with a lot of deliberation, because my first few times playing it, I probably would have rated it higher, but then I thought about the fair amount of setup and everything for each session, and the amount of shelf space and the price. I try not to let price necessarily dictate too much, but it's a real consideration for people to say, am I going to invest that much in this? I think it has a more specific audience than it should, so to speak. Otherwise, it could be higher. But the fact that I was able to play Dice Throne with my 5-year-old, who wouldn't be able to compete head-to-head with me, but we could play against the dungeon or play against an Automa-run boss, that's a good, precious experience for me. So overall, it sticks right at a 7. I could recommend it if it sounds good to you after hearing all of our different thoughts.
And Mike?
Yeah, and the interesting thing here is I'm going to come in the highest. That's not the interesting part. I'm coming in at an 8. The interesting part is that I really don't disagree with really any of the complaints that you're saying. I think value is a consideration, and I tell you what, this game to me would have been rated even higher if they had included 2 characters within this box and not made it purely a standalone situation. To me, this game really should have come with 2 characters in the box, self-contained, so you could play it as is.
Right,
I
then they
don't
could have
love
said, and compatible with Dice Throne.
Absolutely. There's really, to me, there's no reason why that shouldn't have been there. It should not have been completely, it should have been a standalone. Anyway, that's my biggest beef. But the bottom line is I really like Dice Throne. I prefer it as a regular multiplayer game, but I still like, if I've got somebody that doesn't like head-to-head combat, if I'm playing alone, I like still having the option to play it. So that's where I'm coming in with an 8. It's still a lot of fun, but it's not perfect. It does have flaws, and you should be aware of those. It's not going to be a game for everybody.
Well, there you go, folks. I hope that you get what you need from that. Check it out. Until next time, I'm Tom Vassell.
I'm Chris Yee.
I'm Mike DeLisio.
And I'm Roy Candy.
Have fun rolling 5 of the same thing.